You're listening to KSQD Santa Cruz, KSQD 90.7 FM, and streaming live at ksqd.org. This is Community Radio from the Monterey Bay, and this is your Saturday morning garden show in the garden. I'm Stephen E. Popp, along with Joe Truskot. We're your hosts. And today's show is all about orchids. Orchids represent one of the largest of all genuses in the plant kingdom by far, with thousands of different species. And to talk about orchids with us today, we are fortunate to have our guest, who is an expert, orchid expert, hybridizer, and grower, Andy Easton.
And a really cool guy.
Andy is a native son of the magnificent country of New Zealand. He's the founder and owner of New Horizon Orchid Company, originally based in Salinas, California.
Yay.
Which, starting in, I believe, if I'm correct, about 2016, was transitioned in a move to Colombia, where Andy is now a resident, living near Medellin. I would like to welcome and say good morning to our guest, Andy Easton. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Morning, Stephen, and morning, Joe. Yes, it's great. This is something totally new for me. So
good.
I'm very happy to be with you.
Oh, come on! You're a man of the theater. I know it. You got it in you.
Yeah,
Andy.
but I've not done radio interviews. This is very rare. I did a few PBS things in days gone by and that, but no, this is going to be fun.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear you say so. You, sir, are a man of renown in the orchid world. For those who are lovers of the aristocrat of flowers, as it I believe was once called. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Andy, and your background.
Still called that.
Is it? Yeah. Is it the aristocrat? Yeah. And
I got to keep these rosarians in line.
Well, I think the Rosarians would like to think that theirs is the king of flowers, but I know for a fact that orchids have been referred to as the queen of flowers, and I am reminded of Shakespeare's play Antony and Cleopatra, where he described Cleopatra as what did he say? It was age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. And I think that applies pretty well to orchids too.
Well, yeah.
Oh, they're just, they're so diverse. I mean, that's in Colombia you see, or I see, more diversity than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just astonishing, the diversity. To me, almost overwhelming. I mean, they are still today finding new species, and that's fairly in the traditional orchids. The mainstream orchids, new species are relatively rarely found. Maybe 2 or 3 a decade, but in Colombia they're probably still finding them, 2 or 3 a month.
No,
would that be respective then of the many different climate zones that Colombia has,
yes,
with the Andes down to the ocean? Yeah, microclimates.
Yeah, there's little microclimates, and as people move around, some of the areas are relatively inhospitable, and some have been inhospitable for the wrong reasons. With guerrillas and that sort
cartels
of thing.
And the guerrillas.
As people are going out and scientists, there's what I try and encourage and am encouraging, and I'm seeing results, is another generation, young orchid enthusiasts. I'm old. I'm 75 years old as of a month ago, and I'm looking at young people and finding them too. That's the other thing, is you're finding these people that are passionate, and they it's their heritage. When you're dealing with a Colombian, it's good because it's part of their country, the fabric of their society. So I'm having fun. I mean, I'm very happily turning things over to younger people and sharing information and plants and that with them. It's become one of the main focuses now in my hybridizing work. is to involve these young people. So, young, I'll extend young to 40 even. I mean, it's not it's not just 22-year-olds, but there is that to me is very rewarding and very exciting.
Yeah. Are you before we leave the native species, are you finding specimens that have a market potential that would be
not so much, but you never know. In plant breeding, one of the things that I've learned over many years now is that you never know when you need something. It's a bit like rare strains of anything, or the historic varieties of apple or apricot or something like that. You never know when you need the genetics of that specific plant.
Right. Oh, no kidding!
So,
yeah.
It's sometimes it's not immediately apparent. Then you say, "Oh gosh, if only I had that." Or now we're able to say sometimes, "Oh, we've got something here that might give that might pass on that characteristic, which would be disease resistance or warmth tolerance."
Right.
One of the things that we're working on things like warmth tolerance, and what that means is it doesn't mean the orchid needs heat, but it means that the orchid can withstand hot summers, say. So, you say, "Oh, this is a warmth-tolerant orchid." Now, someone can grow it in Kansas and not worry about it in the summertime. I know they have to heat it in the wintertime in their little greenhouse or whatever. But in the summertime, if it gets to 90 degrees, that orchid's quite happy. And that building that heat tolerance into some of the more mainstream orchids has been, it's a very challenging but also a very satisfying some of the results we're getting.
Well, you bring up an interesting topic there in terms of the distribution of orchids and the different species of orchid. I think that a lot of our listeners may perhaps think that orchids are primarily a tropical or a subtropical plant, and yet there are many that grow way outside in more temperate regions. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And by working between those two types, you're creating a sort of a more complex hybrid that basically says, "Okay, I'm quite happy to be cold in the wintertime or cooler in the wintertime, and I can take whatever you throw at me in the summer." And that's a plus. That's a plus for any hobbyist orchid grower anywhere in the world. It really is. And
well, I'm somewhat familiar with the daunting challenges of trying to make a living growing orchids commercially. I spent a few years working with Andy Matsui's orchid operation in Salinas, and primarily Phalaenopsis and Oncidiums out of that operation. But it's such the return is so low per unit, even if you're doing your own tissue culture and producing them on site. It's not a great. It's got to be volume. It's got to be by volume to make any money.
Things are changing.
Yeah,
things are changing.
Yeah.
The Phalaenopsis industry has had some major impacts in the last 12 months. Particularly in the Netherlands, and some of the companies have gone bankrupt. I mean, just gone, completely gone. But say the Cimbidium industry has strengthened. Because the Cimbidiums are probably, in an overall sense, use half the energy of a Phalaenopsis. So I work with Cimbidiums and also the intergeneric hybrids in the Odontoglossum Alliance. Those sort of things, and they are coming strongly again. So and again in both cases with a twitch to the warmer growing things. So it just means that someone in Holland, the summers get warm there now. There's been plenty of warm summers in Holland in the last decade,
climate change.
So those plants are happy there. But in the wintertime, they're also quite happy to be cool.
So
they can grow at the normal Cimbidium temperature. So that's been a challenge I've been working with, and where we're seeing results now. So I would say that the the Cimbidium market in Holland is up as compared to the Phalaenopsis market, which has had a fairly impactful 12 months.
Well, the Phalaenopsis is almost entirely, unless you're living in a climate perhaps that is subtropical, it's a greenhouse type produced item, whereas Cimbidiums, my Cimbidiums at home here in Prunedale outside of Salinas are blooming. We're started blooming the end of December, and doing quite fine.
I always wanted to ask you whether or not the commercial potential of Cimbidiums is the individual flowers for flower shops cut flower trade, as opposed to those ones that are here in California. There people grow them as landscape potted plants. Where's the
landscape plant?
Yeah,
there's a divergence. There's a complete divergence. So what you're seeing now is that, and this is a prediction, so it's not fact. I would predict that the price of Cimbidium, the standard Cimbidiums, we call them the large flowered ones, the price of those will go substantially higher per flower.
Per flower.
So, per flower. So you've got a stem of 10 that probably are on the market in the U.S. now in the $1.50 range per flower, $1.50, $1.75.
That's wholesale.
They'll go up to $5 per flower. So that stem of 10 flowers is $50. And that will be for a premium item for weddings and big social occasions and major arrangements. And that market, it probably won't grow much, but it will always be a high price prestige flower market.
Well, and as a cut flower, they're so long lasting. I mean, the vase life is incredible.
Yes, if you don't use them this week, you can use them in something next week.
And the following week. Yeah, no doubt.
And the following week. So that market will, in my opinion, strengthen both in demand and price. So, and it's being fed by, there's a seasonal production that has almost ceased of Cimbidium cut flowers in the U.S. now. Almost ceased. So if you're in New York or Miami or Chicago, they're coming from Holland. Right now, the Cimbidiums are not coming from California. There's minimal production of those standard Cimbidiums in California now. And there used to be millions.
Absolutely. Well, Andy,
big change there. And then the potted plant market. Now, I've got a bias here because I'm involved in it. I see it as the plants becoming smaller. We're certainly working on developing smaller plants and bringing them back to the size of a Phalaenopsis.
Oh, wow.
So you've got to finish them quickly.
They've got to
finish in 30 months from when you take a little plantlet out of a flask to when it's in bloom. You've got to be in that 28 to 32 months range for finishing the product. And they want minimum of 2 spikes, preferably 3 spikes.
Right,
so that's a compact item, a potted plant item, and that market is increasing. And it's interesting, and I won't actually name the companies because that would betray our commercial confidence, but 3 major nurseries in the U.S., one that's never grown Cimbidiums, 2 that have grown Cimbidiums, have all ordered hundreds of thousands, in total, hundreds of thousands of this type of plant in the last 12 months.
Now, are those being shipped as a tissue culture item and auger to be grown on, or are they semi-finished plants?
They're coming out of the Netherlands, coming out of floriculture in the Netherlands, and they will be grown and finished here. So that Cimbidiums, at the moment, you've got to put numbers on it. Oh. I would estimate there's fewer than 30,000 Cimbidium pot plants a year available right now in the United States.
Wow.
That's unbelievably low.
Yeah, it is.
Unbelievably low.
That's like one nursery's output for a few months or something.
It's almost the case that, again, I won't mention the name of the nursery, but it's almost one nursery. And
Right.
One of the nurseries that has made this big order for potted plants and these more compact cymbidiums is going back into them again.
Well, now are these
and went out. So
are these small plants being grown via? I mean, the smallness of them via hybridizing, or is this plant growth regulators that are being applied?
No, it's Cymbidiums do not respond too well to any of the plant growth regulators.
Right,
so
right.
It's basically a genetic thing, and New Horizon we're working on that because we see that as the future. We don't see houses getting bigger.
Yeah,
we see houses getting
right.
So,
Exactly.
And greenhouses too. You get a big stand at Cimbidium in a hobbyist greenhouse, and it takes over half the greenhouse.
Sure.
That's not the future.
They're
in
big, bold plants.
in my view, anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Well,
but,
no.
And for our Andy, for our listeners who might have a Cymbidium on their patio, what's the blooming cycle? How can they keep them blooming? How can they keep them healthy? Just tell us.
Well, I'll give you some quick tips. I mean, I think where I see trouble, when you see people having trouble with them, that it's pretty easy to say what's wrong. So I think one of the problems, and I've grown obviously in Salinas, I know how to grow there with minimal heat or no heat. So, I think many people overwater them in the period from November to February. I think that's one of the worst setbacks to growing Cymbidiums, on patios and unheated greenhouses and that sort of thing. You've got to, they don't die from being dry.
Right.
It's absolutely the opposite. And think about their ancestry. Their ancestry is in the Himalayas. When the monsoon stops, all they get is the mist at night time, and the moistness around the roots they don't get rain at all. And so that's been one of the big bugaboos for people that are trying to maintain plants under those conditions. I think Salinas Monterey area, relatively easy place to grow Cymbidiums.
Oh, yes, it is.
The regular Cymbidiums, because the climate is not really that hot in the summertime, and the wintertime it's not really that cold. But the dry, paying attention to not overwatering them at that time is critical. And then I think that once the spring starts, everything starts in Salinas around Valentine's Day. They're out in the fields getting going. That's when you start to feed your Cymbidiums. That's when you start to push them into growth. And it's not. People get involved in these complex formulas, and and I say, well, if you're a big commercial operation, that's fine. If you're a duck operation, you'll be fine tuned and that. But something like Nutricoat, I love Nutricoat. It's got a little bit high level of phosphorus, but there's no problem with it.
That's a slow release type fertilizer.
Slow release type fertilizer, and if you apply I think it's 8 to 9 months Nutricoat in February, your plants will grow well. It's going to deplete right at the time when you're going to be reducing the watering before Thanksgiving. It's a sort of a very natural cycle. It's a good product, and I've certainly used it commercially. Now, we fiddle around and add a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that. That's a complex, more a commercial type thing. But for a person that just wants to enjoy their plants and relatively low care, that something like that is a very, very easy fertilizer.
Now, one of the things that I think a lot of our listeners might be confused about also is that Cymbidiums included, that there are different types of growing media for orchids, whether they're epiphytic or, well, lithophytic or saprophytic or terrestrial. And the question always arises, well, should I be putting them in orchid bark? Should I plant them in dirt? Should I just stick them in the crotch of a tree somewhere and let them live off the air? What can you advise?
Never dirt. I mean, I think that's just, well, of course, dirt has different meanings.
Mineral soil. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think bark is still the easiest. I'm going to go with the easiest. But you've got the price of bark. Again, I don't know why, but the price of bark has just become exorbitant in for some customers. The quality of that bark is good. It's an imported bark that many people use, but I'm using bark in Colombia, but it's local bark, and it's maybe not good, but it's it might last 2 years instead of 3 years. Well, that's not the end of the world. So I think there are local bark products. You have to hunt a little bit for them, but that are more reasonably priced. But bark, and then you've got to amend it. You have to put things with it, like some
lava rock or
dolomitic lime, and you gypsum. I always tell people gypsum is the wonder. It's the wonder chemical, because the gypsum is there and it stops the pH, fluctuating. Gypsum is. We always had, dolomitic lime and gypsum to our bark potting mixes. Always. I've never, in the last 50 years, never not done that. And it's just little things like that, and they're so cheap. It's dollar a pound. So it makes, and you can top dress them. If someone says, "Oh my goodness, I already potted my plants," and this guy's talking about, these two things. Well, let's say they potted them last week. Well, they can just top dress them a little bit, and still get the benefits for this coming year.
Sure.
But we always do that. We always add those things in. I try to make fertilizing as safe in the first instance, and that's some of the safeness is done by adding these supplements so the pH doesn't shift dramatically. Right. But the other thing is make it easy. Yeah. If you use Nutricoat, and if you say, well, I don't want Nutricoat, I like Osmocoat. Osmocoat's okay. It's not my favorite product, but it's okay.
One slow release is another slow release is another slow release.
Well, it's better than nothing.
Yes.
But then when you get to November, really cut the watering down.
Well, let me just interrupt you, because a lot of times, people are growing these on their patios, and if we're going to get rain in California, it's going to come in November. So are you suggesting that you move them into the patio or under a shade or so? Now, usually rain hasn't been a problem here for years, but this year we are so sopping wet, and it's going to come down today again, 100% chance of rain this afternoon. So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean,
I would say yes.
Okay.
In an abnormal situation like that, you've got to say, we in Colombia, when I went to Colombia in 2018, I was big-mouthed and stupid enough to say, this is the most perfect environment for growing Cimbidiums I've ever seen.
Uh-huh.
And right after that, the rain started. And the next year, the rain was up by 40%.
Yeah.
The next year, it was up a little more. Last year, at the end of June 2022, we were at 160% of normal rainfall.
Oh, God.
Well,
it was awful.
Yeah.
Awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have another friend from Colombia who has been on the show, and he has told us about the 4 seasons in Colombia where you have a rainy season, a dry season, a rainy season, and a dry season, and the last year there was no dry season.
Yeah.
Correct. and that really right now, I left Colombia yesterday. Right now, we're going back into a dry cycle.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking skyward and giving thanks every day.
Yeah. Andy, I also I want you to explain the whole process of how you hybridize Cimbidiums. We're switching gears here, but what is it that you actually have to do, and what is the process that you've been working with over the years when you say, I've got this great
you
plant?
Want all the trade secrets?
I want you to spill the guts, man. Just lay it out on the table.
We're taking notes.
Put it on the airwaves.
Look, you can only do, I can only tell you what I do. And so, I trained as a horticulturist, my degrees and everything were in horticulture and plant pathology. I have really focused on the genetics now. And, you have to, we work with, mainly now with Arizolan, but formerly with colchicine. So we double the chromosome number of most of the orchids that were floating around 30 years ago, say. Mm-hmm. All the species now exist in tetraploid, doubled from the diploid, changed to tetraploid forms. Mm. We have introduced species that haven't been used before, also as tetraploids. So, and the moment you do that, you can predict, you don't have to see the results to predict, they're going to have slightly fewer flowers by about 25%. They're going to have bigger flowers. They're going to have stronger flowers, longer-lasting flowers, and whatever characteristics are in those species or hybrids that you treat are going to be intensified. Their genetic influence is going to be increased and intensified. So, in the hybridizing, you're working at a fairly sophisticated level, and so the problem is. And the problem has been that people pirate the intellectual property protection on orchids is very weak indeed. And even in Europe, there are very few. I'd use Cimbidiums as an example. Very few protected Cimbidiums there, and so the pirates are. We call them pirates. It's the exact word. They're pirating the cloning. They're all over the world. Mm-hmm. They're in Australia. They're in Taiwan. Mm-hmm. They're in Korea. They're in India. And they're in Holland even. Mm-hmm. So these people will literally, and this could be someone that comes over from China or comes over from India. They can literally go into a supermarket or whatever, buy a plant, take it home, put another name on it, put the same name on it that might be on it, and some of the names are just trade names. They're not the actual correct genetics, and they start cloning it. And then they market that. They market it around. So pirating has become a real negative and a real negative impact on hybridizing.
So the plant patenting process then is somewhat lagging behind.
It's a failure. It's been a failure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the cost of the protection; it's the cost of enforcing the protection and the inability or the unwillingness of national bodies or state bodies to actually enforce it.
Yeah,
that's a big problem. It's a big problem.
All right, I have Phalaenopsis. In fact, they're the two Phalaenopsis that you gave our friend Ruth that are still
alive.
They're still going, man, and they've produced offshoots. And now's the time where I really need to repot them. What's the and I want to separate out the one on it, start cloning it and selling it myself.
Truskotii, Phalaenopsis Truskotii.
I'll name it after Baby Ruth or something.
Yeah.
So
but
what?
You just cut those. You cut those little kikis. They call them kikis in Hawaii. You just cut them off and pot them up. Yep.
And you wait till they have a little root on them before you do that.
Well, you should. Yeah, you should look. You can actually. It's a little trick of the trade that if they're slow rooting, you can tie a little bit of sphagnum moss around the the lower part of that kiki, and they'll root into it very quickly. Then you just tie it on with a little bit of wire or a little bit of tape.
Sure. And
that's not a.
So you put a little bit of commercial orchid food that you bought at the grocery store in a spray can, and then dilute it as much as possible, and just spray it all over and keep them moist but not wet.
Yeah, they'll come away. They're Phalaenopsis are the ones that kiki, the ones that do that naturally are very they're very easy to increase.
Okay. Yeah, because I promised listeners that we would talk about how they get their Phalaenopsis to bloom again, because people just don't know.
Well, it's there's a little bit of a transition, but I think again, the light is important. Now, you don't want to burn them, because the Phalaenopsis leaves burn very quickly, but light and, that direct light will burn for sure. But more early morning light, if you've got somewhere in an east-facing window, and that's going to, the sun's going to pass over by 11 a.m. or 10 a.m., that's a very good light for the Phalaenopsis, or alternately a late afternoon thing.
Right.
Late afternoon, you've got to be, you don't want it sort of before like 5 in the summertime. You don't want it before like 5 p.m. But you still, they still need light.
Yeah, sure.
They're a lower light plant, but they're not a low light plant. And I think light is lack of light is not fertilizer, and it's not potting. You see these poor souls on forums and that. What have I done to my Phalaenopsis? And there's a beautiful looking plant there, and I don't answer it all the time, or don't answer it hardly any of the time. But I would say to them, guys, just give it a little more light. It's not fertilizer. It's not potting. It's bloomed out, and you've had it in the middle of your dining room table for 4 months or whatever. Just give it a little more light, and it'll spike up again.
So they're not necessarily day length sensitive for a photo period. It's just giving them a little more light or a little less light, one way or the other. What about the temperature changes as cooling?
I think the temperature range in the typical U.S. home is perfectly acceptable.
Okay.
I don't. It's not too high and it's not too low.
You don't have to put them into a cold zone for a while to set them off again.
Well, you can do that. It's interesting with the dendrobium. It's a Dutch story, but it's a fun story.
Yeah.
They had a bunch of they were growing nobly type dendrobiums, and there was a place that had a cool room where they used to keep their Cimbidiums. For Mother's Day, they'd pick them a little early and keep them cool. Anyway, it was closed off and it was dark and everything. And some guy made a mistake and he put a trolley of nobly Phalaenopsis in there, and they sat in there in the dark for a month. And so, oh gosh, we forgot that trolley of Phalaenopsis. They went and got them, and they all had buds on them. And they looked at each other, and they said these were plants that were supposed to be going out to be grown on to be finished. Sure. And so from that they learned that they could take those things into the dark for 30 days. I think they reduced it to 21 days eventually, but it was 30 days originally. And they could, at any time of the year, bring them out and get buds off them.
Yeah,
so, sometimes through a mistake, you learn something about the handling of that specific plant.
I remembered at Matsui, and we did do a cooling period on the Phalaenopsis, but it was also fun to have the Dutch guys come over, and they would tell us, not that they made a mistake, that this is what they've always known. this is the way to do it.
Well, they're wonderful growers.
Yeah.
I remember a great story that when Jan Post and Klaus Schoner, who started floriculture, when they were, one day I went to them and we went into the lab and we were looking at, and of course it's a massive organization, and we're looking at all these plants, and they said, we're very embarrassed. And I said, well, why are you embarrassed? He said, well, we had a German guy here the other day who has a little 30,000 square foot greenhouse. Small, just a mom and pop operation.
Sure.
And they were starting to clone Miltoniopsis, which is a Colombian strongly Colombian, environmentally influenced plant. And so anyway, their flasks were terrible. They really were not growing well.
Oh.
And so this guy's looking at them, and they're showing them off to him and said, well, he says, are you stupid or something? And they sort of looked at him. He said, do you ever do any research on Colombia? No. And he said, well, the day length down there is 12 hours.
Yeah.
And you're giving these flasks 16 hours.
A little equatorial.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so they looked at each other, and when a Dutchman realizes he's lost hundreds of thousands of euros, they're not very happy.
No.
No. They changed their culture immediately, and of course, then they started producing beautiful Miltoniopsis. But it was just little things that you don't think about, sort of creep up on you, and and then Miltoniopsis has sort of waned again now. There is a fashion in orchids. They're into it, they're out of it, they're into it, they're out of it. It's a little bit, there are cycles for sure.
Well, one of the things that I think that people don't realize, in particular, I suppose, with the hybridizing aspect, but even just growing them in production, it takes 18 months to 2 years from the time you're breaking that flask open and pricking out those little rooted tissue culture pieces until you have a finished product. And that's a long time to wait to see whether or not you did everything right. There's a lot that can go wrong in that time, and I think that's underappreciated by the buying public.
How do you perform triage in those situations? Didn't you say that you sprout them in Thailand or Vietnam, and then they fly over to you, and then I'm not sure you still do that, but
I can assure you I do. So I have. You always have 2 labs, and we have sort of 2.5. If you don't have two labs, you're running a terrible risk. The lab could have a fire, the lab could have a tragedy, the vent doesn't open and it cooks all the plants. So we always have 2 labs. So we have a lab in Thailand that does a lot of our work, and now, fortunately, we have a lab in Medellin, Colombia, a new lab that is come on stream and is doing excellent quality work there. Right. And as a third backup, is we always have some stuff being cloned, selected and being cloned at Floricultura. So Floricultura are a very sophisticated lab. They do very good cloning and very fast cloning. Now, they're the most expensive. So, you have to balance all these things out. It's a sort of a world view, but the Thai lab is very useful because a big market for us is currently Australia, and a rapidly growing market is China. Rapidly growing. So, Thailand is easy to get to those short distance, relatively, even, Thailand to Australia, there's daily flights,
exactly.
Daily flights. So that's, you've got to sort of be a little bit spread globally, so you're not, there's really no significant lab now, orchid lab in the U.S., unfortunately. I mean, it's just, it's a cycle. It'll come back. For orchids. Now, there are significant plant labs, of course, in Florida and that sort of thing, but not for orchids.
Yeah.
So, Andy, if you could also, apart from the abiotic disorders, could you speak a little bit to what sorts of pest issues, other than something like Pseudomonas that would be a greenhouse issue, that the home grower might face, and what to do about it? What sorts of pests or diseases?
It always seems to be mites and scale. That seems to be the staples. And I never tell people to do something that I wouldn't do myself. So, and I always want something simple and straightforward. So I always use paraffinic oil. No other oil. Paraffinic oil at the correct dilution. And I, as a precaution, not out of necessity, because you can actually spray it in the middle of the day and usually not have any problems, I always do it in the cool of the morning or the evening.
But there's no heat issue with it? There's no issue with high temperatures, heat, if you were putting it on at 80 degrees or something?
I've not ever found that, but I'm just naturally cautious.
Right.
So
right.
That's the only reason I'm doing it at each end of the day. Now, when we were growing, I had a greenhouse. I was running a big greenhouse operation in Florida, and I had a home greenhouse. Then there was every pest you can imagine on the vegetation around and everything. Mm-hmm. And I used to just add the paraffinic oil to the injector, the fertilizer injector.
Okay.
And so I could calculate the dilution and everything. And that I never saw a scale. I never saw a mite. I mean, it was just so easy. And people would say, "Oh, how can you grow Cimbidiums, warm-growing Cimbidiums in Florida and not have problems?" And I said, "Well, that's what we do. We fertilize and we're adding that paraffinic oil in." And
so it's a foliar application then that is going to smother the pests.
Yes. It has no chemical control at all. It is just purely a physical
waxy oil
of those two most common and most damaging pests. Mm-hmm. in Cimbidium.
And so it's essentially just...
Or in orchids, not just Cimbidiums. It could be Cattleyas or anything, yeah.
Fails,
yeah. It's an oil that you
with
spray
the paraffin in it.
Yeah.
But paraffinic. Don't people say, "Oh, we're using winter oil" or something? No. Never.
Yeah.
And that's readily available. And it's not expensive.
Yep.
Again, it's something that you can order it on on eBay or whatever. Right. That type of thing. It's not it's not some complicated. You have to go down and get a permit to get it or anything like that.
Yeah. Or I know
the hobbyist is not going to do those things. The hobbyists want the enthusiasts. They want something that's simple and straightforward.
Yeah. Sure. But they're also, I mean, my experience is that those of us growing things at home want them to look, absolutely perfect, and it becomes very hard. I'll put in a plug for roses. You're buying roses right now that are out there, and they're wonderful, but they were grown in Wasco, or they were grown in Tyler, Texas, and you're putting them in a cold ground here on the coast. And they'll do okay this first year, but they won't rejuvenate for next year. They're not going to be as healthy.
So the varietal selection is wrong for this climate.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the other interesting things about orchids that I don't think a lot of people are familiar with is that there are fragrant orchids. And apart from the ever famous vanilla planifolia, or vanilla fragrans, which is a pretty ugly plant if you've ever seen it, I think. Anyways. But but there are fragrant orchids. Are there fragrant Cimbidiums?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you name a few cultivars or varieties?
Well, lines. I mean, when you have plants bred from Cimbidium encephalium or Cimbidium sinense, these are species lines. They pass fragrance. They pass fragrance on.
Okay.
And then also some of the major species from days gone by, like Tracianum, very fragrant. The problem with fragrance. It's a two-edged sword. Okay. Commercially, if a Dutch grower goes up and he sniffs a flower and it's fragrant, he walks right by it. He walks right by it because he's fully aware that if you sell that as a cut flower, it will last less time because it needs the energy in that cut spike to produce the fragrance.
Sure.
So that shortens the flower life. If it's a pot plant, exactly the same. That the flowers on that pot plant will last a shorter time.
Yeah, more ethylene.
So that's a negative for him. A negative for him. So then the third aspect of it is the few that might be willing to risk it, say in Holland. Well, when they sell them, they're selling them over the winter. They're in supermarkets and plant shops, low light, 6, 7, 8 hours of sunshine a day, and it's not light enough for the fragrance to emanate.
Oh, sure.
So it's
to volatilize,
it's a lose-lose situation.
Yeah.
But now the hobbyist that walks into the orchid show in San Francisco last week and goes to Santa Barbara Orchid Show this next weekend, and they smell a fragrant orchid, I want one of those.
Yeah.
And that's okay. They don't care that it lasts 3 weeks instead of 4 weeks. They don't care.
Yeah.
Well, our most famous one that we were growing back in the day was the Oncidium Sherry Baby, which has a chocolate-like smell, supposedly.
They're still growing it.
Are they still? It's still in the trade.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, I mean, there's lack of imagination in hybridizing.
Yeah. Hey, well, if it sells, it sells, I think the other thing that we always had our difficulty with, I was telling Joe earlier, was when we first started introducing, especially the fails, to the supermarkets, is the grocery guys, the produce guys, they would put these Phalaenopsis right on top of the banana stand or with the apples all around them, and wouldn't understand why all of a sudden all the petals were dropping off the orchids, all the ethylene gas being released.
Yes. It's now they've learned. I mean, now they handle them quite differently.
The ethyl block, and they put them in the right places. But
no. So it's the intergenerics, which you alluded to, at Matsui, and that the intergenerics are changing, and that's the other area that I'm focusing on in hybridizing. And I'm working with a friend who's a very, very good scientist in the San Francisco area, Berkeley, and we're working on those intergenerics to make them warmer growing again. They're making the generics, but
tell me what
to have them.
Tell me, Andy, what those are. I don't know what they are. Endogeneric?
So they're crosses. They're in the Odontoglossum Alliance, the broad alliance, and so they'll have elements of Oncidium and Brassia and Odontoglossum, and in particular, there are some Odontoglossum species that grow warmer naturally, and certainly some Oncidium species that grow warmer naturally than that broad group that's in Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia, the cool growing things. So, again, they're trying to make something which is more durable, and we're working on that now, and it's a work in progress, but it's very exciting. I mean, truly we're seeing plants that you could bloom in, say, Medellin. I'm in a place called El Retiro, which is a little town of 20,000 people that I have fallen in love with. It is a wonderful little town. And 30 kilometers away is Medellin. And Medellin is much hotter. And so we use that as a testing ground. So you get something and you say, well, this should be warmth tolerant. So we can place it with a grower down in Medellin and find out whether it really is. Some perform even better there, and some don't. There's always casualties and failures, but we're trying to make that type so they won't look any different in the public. That's the thing. Sure. The goal is to make something which is quite showy and decorative and good size, good color. Color is the most important thing in selling an orchid. Color. It's color. Now it can be white. A really beautiful white. Someone says, I love white. Well, that's a very important part of the business. But, it can be red, and it's got to be red.
Well, you've got almost every color imaginable, excepting maybe black and the very rare blue. And then all the different the splashes.
Well, hey, come on, guys. Come on. Hey. I'll stop right there at the blue orchid, because you can get those over at grocery outlet.
Sure, a little food coloring goes a long way, Joe.
And they're bright blue.
And
they're natural, and they'll stay blue.
There are natural blue orchid blue Phalaenopsis orchids now.
There are. Thank you. Yes, there are, but they're rare, relatively.
They're just coming onto the market, but like all these things,
Franken orchids.
But I swear, cross my heart, I've had people tell me, I bought this blue orchid and it was gorgeous, and then it died, and then when I got it to bloom again, it was white.
It was white. Oh yeah,
it was white.
And I cut the flower and it turned the water blue. It's amazing.
Well, again, everyone's idea is different. When I was a graduate student, there were two Safeways in Fort Collins in Colorado, and my professor did a study where he had the same carnations in both, and then in one of them he had dyed carnations, and it was really interesting. And he had a jar that was painted so you couldn't see how many peas were in the jar, and you put a dried pea in the jar for the ones you liked. And one side of town where the Hispanic population was strongest, the peas were all in the dyed ones, in the dyed jar. And on the other side, they were in the traditional colours. And he said,
ribald colours.
You learn from that, Andy. He said, there are many markets in the United States.
Amen.
Oh, how interesting. That's
true.
Fascinating.
So true. What colours do you see right now, especially with your hybridizing work? What seems to be the trend right now in terms of colour? Or is it the splashes, the multis?
No. I think the basic color is important.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of there's interest in spotted cymbidiums. That's been I think that's just going over the top a little bit now in a craze that went on for 3 or 4 more years. I think the white is still in cymbidiums is still the predominant color. The alba whites, where the red of the lip is replaced by yellow, are very popular. They're very popular as a clean flower and all this thing, except in China, where that's a flower for death. It's a funeral flower.
Yeah, the color. Mourning is white. Yeah.
So you have to be aware of those things. But I would say that the alba white cymbidium is probably at its peak of demand right at this point. Well, it's at a peak of demand right now. So that's fascinating. And but the rest of the colours, good reds are popular. Again, that's seasonal.
Sure.
A red or a pink for Mother's Day in a cymbidium, it's very difficult to achieve still, but very popular. And Valentine's Day, you get those sort of Easter wants white. Easter's white, and Christmas is red, white, and green for cymbidium.
Yep.
All those. You have all those sort of landmarks out there. When you're hybrid.
Well, I mean, the wedding trade also. I mean, it becomes Martha Stewart does a fancy design in cream-colored flowers.
People we love to hate.
Cream
trendsetters.
All of a sudden, if it's not cream, I don't want it. And it's like,
it's a very fickle market. You understand that. You understand that.
Too. Yeah.
Some years you eat them, and the next year you sell them for twice the normal price.
Well, we always found just change the name and make it sound fancy. Take it from Sundowner to Tequila Sunrise, and you've got a hit.
I don't know. One of the issues that a lot of the Rosarians talk about is that for whatever reason you can register a new rose that you hybridized with a name. You can call it Peace, or you can call it American Beauty again. Yes. And is that true with the Cymbidium trade?
No. I don't like the RHS much, but I would say that they're very strict on nomenclature, and you cannot reuse the name. So, I mean, I think that's terrible. I also used to race thoroughbreds and breed thoroughbreds racehorses, and they're very strict on names there too. And I think that's a good thing, because it's genetic information that you need.
Yeah, I mean, and some of these names, again, they're very trendy, and then they'll change the name. They'll start it off with this name called Stretch Johnson, and then the next thing you know, they're selling the same thing as rock and roll.
It drives the bookies crazy, doesn't it? Yeah, especially when you're trying to place a bet.
That's what they call trade names. They call those trade names in orchids, and that's okay.
Sure.
I mean, that sometimes is a protection against the genetic information you don't want registered.
Well, that's true.
We use some trade names. We use some trade names today because we have to be careful that, again, the pirates, if they've got a real name, let's say it's an orchid and it's Joe Truskot variety Selena,
right?
And it gets an award and everyone wants to buy one, and so the pirates get it, and they start selling it back to the hobbyists at a high price.
Yeah,
and so so you sold it commercially, and then the hobbyists are buying it, at $50 a plant and everything, and it's. It doesn't affect you. You've made your sales into the commercial market, but it really irks me when you see these pirates selling these things to the hobbyists at a high price.
Right.
At inflated price.
Well, I knew this hour would just fly by.
Oh, boy.
And
Scratch the surface.
we have to draw it to a close so the next crew can get in here and set up. But
Andy, such a pleasure.
It's
Such
great
a
hearing
pleasure.
your voice, and I'm so happy to
And
this all worked out.
Do hope that you'll come back for another appearance on the show,
Yeah,
because we have so much more to talk about.
Hopefully I'll survive another year or two. So, Stephen,
Let's hope so. Let's hope
It's
so,
been fun.
and happy planting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.
All right.
Bye for now.
Bye now. Have a great
Bye.
day.
Bye.
Bye.
You too.